Well, good morning and good evening to everybody from around the world who's joining us. We are excited to be having our panel here on remote research, and we're going to wait just another minute as people from around the world are connecting, and then we'll make introductions and get this started. We're just waiting another minute or so as we get more attendees join in, and we'll start the session for today. All right, let's jump into it. So we have a really fascinating topic of personally interesting to me in many ways, and it's kind of remote on remote. So obviously we're having a panel discussion here, remote on a topic that's about remote. So as a quick way of introduction, the topic here is remote research with a real focus on behavioral research, and the types of topics and the applications we'll be discussing will be all apropos to the expertise of our panelists. The WorldViz moderators, we just have the next slide, or two of us, myself, Andy Beal, and I am one of the co-founders of WorldViz, and I've had the interesting and fun career working in virtual reality for almost 3 decades now, starting the use of VR tech in behavioral and human research in the early 1990s. And then my co-moderator here, Sato, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the product manager of Vizard, our virtual reality toolkit for researchers. And I also come from UCSB in the psychology department, and also a background in computer graphics.
Thank you. And I just want to add, one aspect of the remote. One of the earliest areas, just a personal interest in remote, was the field of teleoperators. And what would it be like to, be a driver of a vehicle if the vehicle is, 100 miles away? Could you control that? Could you, achieve interesting, remote behavior? And also, just what would be the psychology? Would you ever feel like you're 100 miles away in that vehicle? And so just the whole concept of teleoperation, telepresence, and telescience, these are not the same, but interrelated in fascinating ways. And I just find this topic so exciting. So if we could have the next slide, please. I'm thrilled to introduce our lineup of panelists today. I'm going to let each speak for a couple of minutes on their background, but every one of these has a really unique and in-depth experience, both in the behavioral sciences, building and running experiments, and in virtual reality, and all sorts of technology issues that I continue to learn from today. So we have Gary Bente from the Department of Communication at Michigan State, and I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself briefly, Gary.
All right, yeah, as I'm older than Andy, I'm a little bit longer in this business, at least 2 years. So my first approach to virtual reality was in '89, trying to program my own avatars. And I, got stuck with this kind of topic for the last, few decades as well. And I was for 30 years at the University of Cologne in the psychology department, responsible for social psychology and media psychology, very much focusing on applications of VR, mostly in basic research on nonverbal communication. And 3 years ago, I had the opportunity to, go to the US. Actually, in Germany, we have mandatory retirement, not in the US. So I shifted my office to MSU East Lansing, where I'm now very happy working in the Charisma Lab, which is it's the acronym for Center for Avatar Research and Immersive Social Media Applications, which I'm happy and really honored to be the director of. And that's my, short story.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Excited to have you. Next, I'd like to introduce Mary Hegarty, who's professor at the Department of Psychological Brain Sciences at our local to Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara. And she was actually one of my professors back in my early days at graduate school. And so she and I connect for quite a while now. And she's been involved throughout my grad school days in various forms of VR. So, Mary? Your mic isn't on yet, Mary.
Okay, professor at UC Santa Barbara for the last 30+ years. And my research is on spatial cognition, and I particularly use VR in research on navigation. We're interested in measuring navigation ability, and we have done this both, in a variety of formats, including just desktop VR and actual really walking in the real world. But immersive VR kind of gives you that perfect middle ground where you can control the environment, but also have a more naturalistic experience where you're walking in a virtual environment. I've also interested in spatial cognition very generally, including sort of spatial thinking in STEM. So we've also done some work on trying to teach organic chemistry, have people sort of manipulate virtual models and understand chemistry, understand structure of molecules that way. So I've benefited a lot from Andy Beal and the fact that he and his advisor Jack Loomis developed the virtual reality techniques for Santa Barbara back in the 90s or so. And I also am the current director of the UCSB Center, Research Center for Virtual Environments and Behavior.
Thank you, Mary. And next, I'd like to introduce Sarah Creem-Regehr, who is a professor at the Department of Psychology in Utah. And she and I have collaborated on a few projects over the years, and great to have you, Sarah.
Thanks. Thanks for inviting me. And yes, I'm a professor in the psychology department at the University of Utah in the cognition and neurosciences area. And I've been doing immersive virtual environment research for about 20 years since I arrived at the University of Utah. And I have known Andy since then about too. We kind of met, I think, in starting a collaboration with Jack Loomis at Santa Barbara, kind of early in my time at Utah. And so I've been co-directing a pretty interdisciplinary group at Utah across psychology, computer science, and then more recently anthropology, where we're interested in studying space perception, visual space perception, spatial cognition, and emphasizing the role of actions in our bodies and how we represent space. And so VR provides a really good mechanism to allow people to interact in controlled environments, but still that are ecologically valid. And so that's one of the things that we've really focused on using VR kind of in two ways. One is to address theoretical questions where we can take virtual environments and manipulate those environments and the information in those environments in order to test questions that we might not be able to test easily or at all in the real world. And then also we've become very interested in applied aspects of virtual environments. So what makes them most useful? How can people perceive and act in virtual environments in this as closely as to in the real world? We've been interested in questions about absolute scale, how do people perceive sizes and distances in virtual environments, as well as more recently using VR for studies of navigation and other spatial cognition questions.
Excellent, thank you, Sarah. And last but not least, John Allen, who WorldViz has had the pleasure of working with as a very skilled researcher, an experimentalist for many years now. John?
Thanks, Andy. So yeah, I'm John Allen. I'm a research software engineer currently at the University of Kent in the UK. I've been here 9 years, and before that, I've always worked in software development within research. So particularly at Kent, I support a number of our academics across School of Psychology, developing software for the research. So in particular, Vizard virtual reality scripts to cover quite a range of applications. So for example, some with face recognition, some we've been doing investigating the actual feeling of immersion or presence in a VR scene. We've also done some large scale tracking of how people engage socially with avatars. So that's on the VR front. And then more generally, I develop a lot of behavioral scripts in ePrime and PsychoPy and Inquisit and things like that to support research. And then I also do some data science work because increasingly we have larger and larger volumes of data. So working with MATLAB or Python and R just to help with the analysis. So that's about me.
All right, thank you. So yeah, no, I'm excited. There's a broad, range of experience with the technology. Certainly, every one of you has that across different tools and different types of technology, and equally in different types of behavioral research. So the question, and admittedly, and I think all of us realize that this question, the topic, remote science. How achievable is remote science using virtual reality technology? This is a sign of our times right now. That was what motivated this topic. But the question is the one I wanted to start with here is a little bit the high level. Using virtual reality research, this is a niche within a niche of research. It's within the niche of behavioral research. This is not, we're not going to achieve remote VR science for free. It's going to take sweat and blood to get that working. And we'll uncover some of those complexities in this. So I just want to start with how important do the members of this panel think it is to try for that and try and get immersive VR? And how realistic is it that we can get that achieved when VR, is still fraught with so many just complexities? That said, every one of us here uses VR day to day, and if you dial it in right, it can be a workhorse. So. All right, so I'm gonna we'll see how this goes in remote with whoever wants to answer first. We'll just kind of take it somewhat ad hoc, or I will call on people. So anyone want to start?
I mean, I'm happy
Mary?
to.
John, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it is important, at least not because we have funding from research bodies and we have a commitment to deliver a period of research in a period of time, and the clock's ticking. So if we can't run studies in a lab at the moment, we need to sort of think creatively to how we can sort of continue that research. So certainly that's why we've been exploring different ways where we can't bring participants into our laboratories.
Yeah, exactly. Every one of you has had, your labs shut down basically and can't run the human study.
Yeah, and we're not expecting to be able to get back in there with participants in 2020, really.
Yes, that's crazy. Yep, but probably true. Gary, if you want to add?
Yeah, no, same for us actually. But I think there are maybe two aspects of it, at least in my view. So maybe you remember there was this nice paper of Holland and Stornetta on the use of media, which is actually applicable to any kind of media, TV and radio and VR. And they talked about, in a kind of, picture of using shoes or crutches. So given COVID-19, VR and remote science could be a crutch, and crutches are by nature, they are thrown away when you can walk on your own feet again. And so they have overcome a specific impediment, and this is important. But shoes take you to places you wouldn't go barefoot. So you can do things, that would not be possible otherwise. And I think this is actually, for me, the not so low-hanging fruit, but also the most inspiring goal for, rolling out VR into the homes, bringing the labs to the homes, and getting a very realistic stimulus materials to the homes. And this might be dependent on the questions. And if you go for spatial orientation, like the colleagues here, then this is for sure something where you can really combine internal and external or ecological validity ideally. But also for us as more social psychology researchers, it's super interesting to get these avatars, realistically displayed. We're using remote research already by pre-rendered, avatar presentations of human emotions and interactions, and then we just put it into Qualtrics, and then you have the little pictures. So what about having this really immersively displayed, in the homes? This is one thing, and I think this would give us access to bigger numbers of subjects if this technology is available. And this is probably the other question: how can we get the technology there to the homes? I guess it will be there sometime anyway, and we should be prepared for it. And otherwise, we have to think of how we can now roll it out. And maybe this is a different question. But actually, I see the two necessities. Now our lab is closed. It's really locked down completely. So we have to do something about remote. But the other thing is, I see that this could be a really, really huge opportunity for the future to get bigger numbers with high immersive settings and so on.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I guess we've been talking amongst ourselves to all the other audience members. We are approaching the topic directly here of being able to run your science with people, your participants, human subjects, from their own homes in order to overcome the lockdowns right now. So, Sarah, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll add to that. So, I think the answer is, for me, yes, it's very important to try to get to run VR remotely. When we first shut our lab down in March, our first thought was like, we kind of have had ups and downs in terms of how much VR studies we were running, and we realized that like pretty much every single project a grad student was running or that we had associated with our grants was using VR in some way. And so we really needed to think about how do we continue to get research done. And so, but what I would say is our first thought, and still kind of the direction that we're going, is trying to think about adapting. Most of our studies have been immersive VR with head-mounted displays, but how do we adapt those potentially for the technologies that people do already have at home, such as with desktop VR? So, in the past, I've really always made a distinction between immersive VR and desktop VR in the sense that we do a lot of studies that involve people walking and interacting and being in this kind of immersive situation. But I really didn't think that was as feasible as thinking about how could we take these HMD studies that we're running and be able to convert them to do for participants to use on their own laptops or on their desktop computers. So that's the approach that we started with. And we've been thinking about ways to still have it be immersive in the sense that people are interacting with these virtual environments, but they're not in HMDs. So I wanted to bring that up because I think we can, we can think about either, providing participants with HMD technology or recruiting participants that already have HMDs, which are some approaches that are out there. But we could also think about adapting our studies for the home technologies that are more common.
Right. So you're kind of splitting immersive into fully sensory immersion through goggles versus more of a sense or a psychological immersion through a desktop sort of interactive simulation, right?
That's right. And you could still have, first-person perspectives and navigating through virtual mazes, or you could have some of the work we do is on perceived affordances. So can people make judgments about how they can act on space? And that I think is still possible to do with a screen and not necessarily requiring immersive head mounts.
Yeah. In some ways, you're sort of suggesting that how realistic is it to get goggle-based VR done remotely right now? I guess you're putting your bet on the non-goggle-based in terms of
at least
how
to
realistic.
Start. Although after talking with you and thinking a little bit more about this, I think there are some exciting directions to go to do HMD work as well. But if we want to think about moving quickly and making it accessible, but there's still, I think we'll get to this, a lot of issues with even doing desktop VR studies in the home, so I think we should talk about this as well.
Yeah, well, I think we'll expand on some of those. Right?
Yeah, I'll just chip in. I think I'm in the same place as Sarah, in that my work, what I mostly want to be able to do is measure somebody's navigation and ability in some way, and that has certainly been done a lot in the lab in desktop studies. I mean, I have studies saying it's not exactly the same, but I think it's a pretty good proxy to put people in a virtual environment and have them navigate. Is a pretty good proxy for real world navigation. So I also I don't have the luxury of having somebody like John in my department who can do a lot of the technical programming for me. So it's like my grad students trying to learn how to program. So again, I think from our perspective, getting to being able to do sort of desktop VR remotely will get us pretty far, I think, in the questions we want to ask, and that's kind of where I'm wanting to go right now.
Okay. All right. So maybe before we dive deeper into really, I guess, why we want to achieve goggle-based, I'd like to hear from several of you, because since organizing this panel, I've actually learned quite a bit on what are some existing methods of doing science remotely, in particular behavioral science. And it's there's actually precedent and methods pre-pandemic that I know several of you have been involved in. So I think it'd be useful to all the audience members to get a sense of what's already sort of achievable with existing, maybe just desktop methods only, and what are the pitfalls that you've experienced so far? Because it's going to that as a base of experience and lessons learned is going to likely apply as we try and get more immersive technologies done remotely.
I don't mind starting here, because I can say that I had done nothing remotely before COVID-19 forced us to close our labs, but we were in this position that we just had this sort of reaction time, working memory type study that we needed one more experiment to finish a paper, and it had been the experiment was programmed in PsychoPy. So we were able to put that online and using Pavlovia to put that experiment online. And we just used our local subject pool we had because there was still a local subject pool that available, and we're able to run that experiment. And I think just some of the issues were we really had to work hard on the instructions, because if you're putting this up online and somebody is having to figure out on their own how to do this experiment, there isn't a lab assistant there that they can ask for clarification. So we really worked on that. We had to add more practice trials. We talked about having our RA actually just call the subject as they were starting the experiment, but in the end we just kind of gave them the RA's phone number and said, do the experiment between these hours, and if you need, if you don't understand anything about the instructions, call this person. But nobody called, and I mean, there's sort of a dual task in this experiment, and about 20% of people don't really do well on the secondary task, and we just eliminate them. So that's our way of sort of detecting data quality in this experiment. And actually, yeah. I mean, we ended up getting similar data quality to what we get in the lab. So as I say, this is with our own subject pool. We're about to do a follow-up study. Hopefully we'll be launching it next week, but we're going to go to Prolific Academic, which is one of these more general public type where you're just recruiting people from the general public. So that'll be our next step. But so far we were able to at least run a basic sort of reaction time.
Will you be running the same study? You're broadening the subject pool. Will you be running the exact same study?
Actually,
a
similar study, although, it might actually be not a bad idea to replicate the study with the other subject pool to get a sense of the
data
quality. Yeah.
Okay. who else has experience with remote science right now?
Yeah, we're doing actually some of our person perception studies, or actually plenty right now, even before the COVID, online. So actually we're using VR still for stimulus production, so motion capture and character animation tools. But then actually it's in the end, it's a 2D clip that we just, upload on Qualtrics or on MTurk then after that, and having the people, using sliders and rating scales and whatever to comment on it. So we have very good experience with that. It's 1 week and you have 150 cases in, so that's super nice. Actually, I personally would like to have the virtual reality, really the head-mounted systems out there to some degree, and we're just now planning how to do that, how to ship it, how many we need to distribute it effectively, even maybe paying the price for having not this kind of fast data collection routines going on, because I actually know that there are so many influences in the home situation setting. So we don't have a standardized laboratory setting. So people do it in different times a day. They do it, overeating, and others do it, maybe even not yourself. So a little bit more of a controlled setting, like really bringing not the experiment, but the whole lab to the homes. This is looks very desirable to me, actually. So that's one of the aspects why I really would love to see us going there as well. I don't think this is a low-hanging fruit. I don't think it's happening, in the next whatever few months or so. But maybe we should keep it in mind, because this would also mean that people would need tools to customize these laboratory settings, and this is something to consider on the development side. If the platform has these capabilities, have libraries to just do something about your setup. For me, Qualtrics and this stuff, that's a closed shop. You have some options and that's it. If you're working with Inquisit or other tools or Pavlova, this is, I think this is more flexible because you can go to the source code. But actually there you have the limitation. It's not 3D, it's not virtual reality. So having a comparable, approach with regard to VR, personally, I think this would be very desirable.
Thank you. And let me just mention to all the audience, there is a mechanism on GoToWebinar to ask questions, and I meant to introduce that at the beginning. Please feel free to ask questions. We have somebody that's going to be sort of monitoring those, compiling them, and then after we've gone through the organized questions, we will take questions, the written questions from the audience, and do our best to see if we can answer some of those. So. Right, and back to, I guess, yes, Sarah?
Yeah, I can add a few things to comment. So we had done some remote studies before the pandemic that mostly, or all had focused using, just using Qualtrics type survey presentation, where we would, we're interested in having people make judgments about visualization. So we didn't care about reaction time so much. We're interested in, presenting a visual stimulus and having people make decisions about it. And then, and so Qualtrics in that format, worked fine. When we started thinking about switching our VR studies to remote, it got much more complicated, because we're, some of the issues we had to think about were, we're using Unity for our VR experiments, and we wanted to get that Unity-based experiment to the participant, right? Even if it's a desktop. And so there are ways to do that. We were kind of staying away somewhat from putting it completely online. We thought if we could actually get the executable file to participants, then they could run it on their computers, and we could then have the data. We could modify the Unity build so that we could have the data sent directly back to us, like through an email. So that's the approach that we've started to do, and already faced a few obstacles, because we realized, like, we kind of, from our academic perspective, have a different, computer technology lifestyle than a lot of like the average participant. And one of our projects our bigger project using VR right now is looking at kids in their perception, action, and spatial memory in immersive VR. But we thought we could potentially adjust a VR study that we could then send to parents to have kids run, because this is, kids have a lot of time right now, and especially when they were even home from school during the school year, but now even during the summer. So, we took a first attempt at putting the Unity file, the files in a folder on a Google Drive and sending it to a parent to download. And we faced even like the obstacle that we didn't think about, that this one parent didn't have a mechanism to unzip the file. They had to download a zip extractor, and we were just thinking that would be something that was kind of obvious that we all have on our computers, but this parent didn't, right? So then we had to back up and say, could we send this program as a game installer, that it would just like open up right away, install on their computer, and that actually seems like a better solution. So I think it's this iterative process where we're thinking, oh, this will work because we can test it with our grad students and they can all do it fine, right? But then, but it's different when we're sending these projects out into the community. So, one thing to think about in that sense, and I think there's a lot related to that they need to have the right operating system. So if we only have it built for Windows, they need to have a Windows machine. They need to have potentially a mouse connected to their laptop if we're doing some sort of like navigation experiment where it's more difficult to do it just with the touchpad. So these are things that we've been thinking about, that I think would be good to kind of communicate in terms of the unforeseen obstacles.
The friction points, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. John, any experience on existing studies you want to chime in on?
Sure. I mean, yeah, like the others, we've been doing Qualtrics online for a long time. We've also been using Inquisit for a good 3 or 4 years for running reaction time type studies online, and had good success with that. And then more recently, although we've been using CyclePy for a long time, we've only recently switched to using Pavlovia for online experiments to get reaction times, and that's been good. We did have some issues with Inquisit with browser compatibility, and like Sarah was saying as well, with different operating systems. So you do have sort of a higher attrition rate, but then because hopefully you can get a lot more participants, that you can cope with those, even at a higher failure rate than lab studies. But so they've been going well. And more recently, I mean, I don't want to preempt later questions, but we have run some Visit VR scripts online. We looked at taking a .exe approach, but we haven't actually run that for real yet. We've just been using Zoom and doing a screen sharing scenario. So it's a desktop-based VR. So it's obviously not the full immersion of having a headset HMD, but and it's obviously only good for a basic decision-based type experiment. So in our case, it's sort of a yes/no type decision accuracy thing rather than reaction time, because how we've been doing it, the researcher runs it and shares their screen with the remote participant, who gives a verbal response that then the researcher keys in. So, I mean, we're still running the study. We haven't looked at the reaction time, but I'm doubtful that we'll get any sort of much meaningful data on the reaction time, but the accuracy should be good still. So yeah, I guess that sums up where we are.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of those comments have kind of queued up my next question to you all. And, that's I'd like to hear your thoughts on the ability, the pros and cons of trying to control a remote laboratory. So, I mean, just look at all of our backgrounds, and this is relatively tame compared to the Zoom meetings that I am typically holding. We all have a fairly sedated, I have the most obnoxious background, I guess, with my green. But so far, no animals running back, or kids, etc., or carrying the camera around. But just seriously, if we start relying on science, on data integrity when it's running out of people's homes, what are the pros and what are the cons? And a couple of things that have come up that have been raised that I've been thinking about is, and John, you were just mentioning, I guess, like a supervisor, I've been involved in many VR research studies, and we often have a spotter or, a live assistant monitoring somebody. Is that going to be needed? Whether that, obviously, a live person is hopefully not actually in the house with the person, it'd be remote. Does they need to be monitored by webcam or to answer questions? What's our aspiration there? Would we dare let a participant get out of their seat and stand, or even more so walk, right? It raises certainly some safety questions. And what are the concerns about the cleanliness and the HMDs if we're expecting to somehow share or ship headsets out to others? So, and even the legal rules of this. So, it's opening up certainly some new questions. Is it overall? Do you think the control is going to be better or worse? I guess so.
So, I can think of it. I see a couple of positives. One is, our science is. We're always being criticized that our science is based on, undergraduates. People, university students between 18 and 22, and most of psychology is. So one advantage of this is that we can really reach a broader population. Another advantage I've heard is, I haven't done it yet, but if you actually put an experiment out on something like, prolific academic, you go to lunch and you come back and you have your subjects. You get 100 subjects in an hour, whereas, it's VR. So those are two big advantages. But then, of course, the disadvantage, the big questions are just, the control. And we've talked about that even in things like questionnaire studies and Qualtrics. You think, well, are people in noisy coffee shops when they're doing this, or are they doing it at home, or are they doing it while their kids are, screaming in the background, etc. So I think, that's the difficult thing. Now, of course, one thing, because it's easier to collect it, well, it depends on whether we're talking having to ship HMDs or something, but for some remote studies, maybe because they're so easy to run, you can run a lot more subjects, so that can, you can just accept that there's just going to be more error in the data, and then you run more subjects to try and control that. But it's something like having people to do immersive VR, then you're either sending them the equipment or relying on them having it themselves.
For the sake of just the way I'm asking this question right now, we're actually, the next question that Sandra is going to dive into is some of the technical difficulties. Let me just wave the magic wand for this question and say we have the ability to get working goggle, HMD-based VR. So Mary, you're raising a really interesting point, and that's just breaking out of the demographic of undergraduate research participants, right? The 18 to 22 age group, right? So no, that's great. So that would be a strong pro, assuming we can work out the technicality. So what are the pros and cons?
Well, maybe that's some other people.
I would just add up to that, not only breaking out of that age demographic, but increasing diversity of our sample broadly, right? So, one of the things we face in Utah is that we have a pretty homogeneous ethnic population, right? Like, so we don't have broad diversity in ethnicity. We also don't typically have diversity in age when we're recruiting from the college population. So, but this way, and even if you're looking at potentially gender differences or other types of individual differences, being able to kind of broaden our sample, I think, is a really, really strong positive. So,
yeah, good point.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see that these kinds of considerations, they have been done in other areas of research, not university research, but this kind of opinion research and political studies and so on, where they always wanted to look at diverse, even maybe representative groups and what they actually did. And I guess this is another aspect to consider here, is building up panels to do this. And this is a huge investment for sure. We were part of a panel where we distributed PsychoViz set-top boxes into over 1,000 households, which is costly, but there sometimes are people interested in it, so they do it. So the conception of a panel That could be, John mentioned it, recently, that this could be also an idea, yeah, to think about, and how big can such a panel be. And this would mean that we can really make sure that we have diversity in all regards in there to a certain degree, and that's fantastic. And it's also a little bit of an incentive for the households to have this kind of new devices, not to speak of what they can do else with it. So but this is more a business model than a research model. With regard to your first question about control, yes, I think you definitely think about different kinds of control. So first of all, maybe just the scheduling, so you know when it's happening, so you can be present and somebody is supervising a messaging coming from the people if they experience problems. This kinds of very, very low level messaging where you can be, if we do studies, they're using a little bit more of, let's say, stimulus material that could be not offensive, but not very convenient and so on. So the researcher has to make sure he's next door to be able to respond to problems that the participants encounter, also technological or technical problems, handling this stuff. So this kind of open channel is super important. And then there are other studies that we do where we actually have confederates now in the lab, and having a possibility to have confederate studies set up in this remote way with VR also would require the open bidirectional channel. And not to speak about our just current research on investigating how VR can really serve as a future communication platform, getting rid of all this kind of diversity relevant aspects of appearance and making people more similar with regard to stereotype relevant cues. Then you need an open two-way channel as well between the participants. So for me, this kind of two-way real-time interaction is really a very crucial aspect of these solutions for the future in many regards, actually.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, Andy, just picking up on your point about the compliance, I guess one that we haven't done yet, but it might be that like we do in a Qualtrics questionnaire, we typically have attention checks, and perhaps we should look to maybe add something, a VR equivalent of an attention check to help with that, to help us then filter out sort of bad data. But the studies we've run so far have been studies that we were primed, ready to run in a lab, and they've just been quickly ported. What we haven't done is maybe to think about new studies that can sort of capitalize on the ability to get a more broader range of participants, the demographic side, and also that's less susceptible to some of the problems. So that might be interesting to see, depending how long this carries on, whether people design different experiments that whether the disadvantages are less of an issue. Yeah.
Well, I think the automatic sort of awareness or attention, that's really interesting. I mean, every HMD obviously tracks head rotation and position. There might be, some sort of just fairly simple passive measure on that. Unfortunately, only a few are integrating eye tracking, built in, and it's still a mystery to, I think, to all of us why Oculus isn't doing that yet. But they may be taking an Apple approach on that. But just overall, on a positive note, my experience with a project that this company has been doing, WorldViz, for several years now is collaborative VR, in trying to just basically, to me, the future of communication, the future iPhone is going to be a VR sort of a technology, and just to have, social connectedness through social presence. And bottom line, just in VR, when you're meeting with somebody, I find it, even though it's through VR, and even though we're wearing the goggle, and even though it's through an avatar, in many ways, it's so much more intense because your other co-interactants, they're almost unwittingly removed from all the distractions of the real world. They're not glancing at their cell phone anymore. They're not making side glances at a colleague in the room. So, when we'll sometimes, even if somebody's physically with us, we'll sometimes meet in VR like at a trade show, and we're just 10 feet apart. But it makes for a much more powerful, it's like a little bit like the old Get Smart cones of silence. You really are kind of removing distractions. So it's not clear to me. That wouldn't be a huge benefit of popping somebody into a headset and taking them out of their living room, and getting them out of those distractions. So.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think we had gone into this thinking the HMDs are going to be like really hard to get, these HMD studies going. So we would do desktop, but the advantage of the HMD over the desktop is that you really have blocked out the real world. Whereas desktop studies, if you think someone's just looking at their laptop or even on a tablet, there's all sorts of distractions. So I think there's trade-offs there. Maybe the desktop studies we can get done more quickly because more people have those technologies at home, but the HMDs could give us potentially more controlled data.
Yeah, and John's point about the measures of attention, you might be able to sort of, implicitly pull out of that, right? So, right.
One issue though you might have to worry about is simulator sickness, because in immersive VR, a certain proportion of people, get sick. And of course, in the lab, we have these very careful protocols and we observe the subjects, and if we see that they're sweating or something, we immediately stop the experiment. So if somebody's doing this at home, you can't, you could really, not have, might end up making people sick because they don't know when to stop.
Yeah, that's a good point, really. Particularly for getting ethics approval for a study. You asked much earlier on, Andy, about whether we'd let people stand up, but if someone was standing up unattended, then that is a risk, I guess you'd have to think about.
Well, obviously, always, doing this, we'll have to get this approved, and that's going to be an interesting new area for the university administrations to review. So.
Yeah, I can comment on that. We just revised an IRB for our kid VR studies to be done remotely. And so we did, in that case, we had a whole section on the risks of immersive VR, and this we were saying we're going to do just on desktop. So we took out, some of the extreme risks like chance of seizure and things like this, but at the same time we added in that we would have, that since this is a parent, helping a child run this, we would have the parent watch for any signs of simulator sickness and stop the study as soon as they noticed anything, things like this, that we would have had the experimenter do, that we had in the protocols for the experimenter to do when we would do it in the lab. So we adjusted those protocols, and we just got that approved. So, but we weren't proposing to do at-home HMD studies. So that's one caveat. But it is something to think about. Not only what identifying what the risks are and how to protect the participant, but then also we had to modify protocols about retrieving the data, and those are other issues I think to think about of de-identifying data and making sure that their privacy issues are privacy is protected.
Right.
Yeah, that was another question, I guess.
For Sato to jump into a couple of the technical issues that he is a product manager, of a VR solution here, Vizard, is dealing with daily. So.
Yeah, that was actually what Sarah was just referring to about sharing data. So I guess I was just curious what your guys' thoughts are as far as making sure that you have reliable data and how you can share that with privacy concerns, and just kind of what your methods might be for when you're distributing and sharing that data from participants. Obviously, there's going to be even privacy concerns, and as well as just how you store that data and how you distribute it.
Well, I mean, if we went for a .exe route where we let the remote participant download the .exe and install it and run it, we'd have that issue for an easy way of getting the data file back to us. And when we spoke previously, you mentioned that WorldViz were looking into something. I don't know if you've got an update on that to sort of make that more robust and automate that aspect.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's okay. I think Andy had some.
Yeah, we are starting to explore, and so it's not rolled out yet, but everybody has access to cloud storage. And so what if we could just, bundle together a very simple, 1 or 2 line Python calls where you just put into your program, your remote experiment, your API key, the equivalent of your password that would just give access to a folder, or just, do a burner account, in a sense, a Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive. And that would be the place that right from the EXE, it would just throw the data back, assuming the device is on the network, right? So.
Yeah. Actually, did you hear about our problems here in Germany getting the Corona app up and running? It was about actually, data safety and privacy issues. And the final solution that came out 2 weeks ago now is just, storage only on the local mobile, on the private mobile. There is no central storage whatsoever. There's only a short handshake in cases of, with weird kind of coded numbers. So this was a long discussion. And in this case, with the remote research, actually, we are in a better situation to some degree than in the lab, because in the lab, our computers are storing everything, and if something's happening in between during the process, people can hardly say, yeah, they can say in the end, I insist that this will be deleted now. But in the first moment, it's in our hands. So, but having the chance here to store everything decentrally, locally, and then in the end to be asked, and now do you want to ship the data? I think this could be something, a convincing argument also for IRB, to make sure that the privacy concerns are really, handled well. And so for me, this is actually something I would definitely do, because it's another measure, security measure for everybody, makes you feel safer, because it's now your private area and you working on it, and still you have the chance in the end to send or not, which is not usually the case. Even if you do all tricks, it's recorded in between. So
right. No, it's a really good point. I could see that being viewed very favorably to a lot of people, probably, that they get the final say,
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think that would be important.
Yeah.
But certainly that issue of getting the data at the end was one of the factors that's made us go down the screen sharing route so far, rather than sending a standalone program, because I think it was Sarah said earlier about sort of the IT skills of the remote person may be limited, and getting them to find the data file and then email it to you or upload it could be a challenge. So if we can automate that would be a real help.
Yeah, I would say that's a big message, that do not require the participant to send the data back to you. So I think but Andy's solution is great. Like, that's basically what we did with Unity too. We have code in the script that then the data, just a text file, gets sent back to a lab Gmail, and we have the participant only enter an ID number and other demographic information that we need, but no identifying information, and then we get that text file. So that's very possible, especially with a lot of the types of data that we collect. Even if it's a large VR experiment, the data file is really just responses, coordinates, things like that's reasonably small to send.
Well, what kind of data do you all think would be interesting to send? And what's some other things other than just head tracking?
I mean, a lot of our experiments are effectively trial-based studies, where we're collecting a number of parameters. So we get something pretty much like an ePrime or a CircuitPy file, a CSV file of just one row per trial. So it's just effectively a flat text file that needs sending up. I mean, sometimes there are a lot of columns and they've got XY coordinates and orientation parameters and things like that in as well. But that's the type of data files we normally have.
So we would probably be interested in, tracking where people move through a virtual space. So you might, give them a virtual environment that they have to explore, and then you're interested in, do they actually explore the whole environment or not? And then, maybe give them, after they've explored the environment, or after you've maybe given them some experience of the environment, then, you know, have them the goal of like navigate to a certain location in the environment and look at, you know, the path they took. Did they take the most direct path, or did they take, you know, the path they have learned before, that sort of thing. So we're interested in sort of, it would be just XY, I think, or, you know, tracking coordinates through the space.
Yeah. So all HMDs give the yaw, pitch, and roll of the head, the XYZ, and then obviously whatever the experimental typical or intrinsic parameters are, like the maze, the location, decisions. I know, Gary, you've been looking into something even beyond what the standard measurements of consumer HMDs, using yet another consumer technology, I think, right?
Yes, that's right. Actually, we're using now in the lab, in the current program, project, we are using EEG and mobile EEG and PsychoViz in the lab still, but it's kind of consumer product. Here I can even show you. This is this little thing here. That's the Muse. It's collecting PPG, like pulse volume, amplitude, and heart rate, and 4-channel EEG, which is not a lot, and accelerometers and gyro in addition. So, but okay, yeah, I particularly like the PPG measure, the photoplethysmographic heart rate measures actually very much, and so this can be worn under the headset even, but it would be really nicer to have more channels and have it really better integrated in the headsets. You know, this would be fantastic, and you know, for many reasons. Even if we would roll this out to the homes. And I'm working with Ralph Schmetzler, who's a colleague of mine at MSU, and he's a EEG and a neuroscience specialist, and he's really very much into that line, and I'm very happy to work with him on that. And actually, we want to really have a kind of, you know, completely integrated system to be rolled out. But actually, if you roll it out with PsychoViz, you also would have kind of measures about, you know, cyber sickness to some degree. So we would have additional data about, you know, attentional things going on, and you know, feeling dizzy and these things. So it will give an additional added value beyond the research question. So I guess that this is something people will end up, and I hope that the consumer industry will also see the opportunities for relaxation games or whatsoever integrating this. So technology probably will move. And if you look at the Muse, you know, this system, yeah, it's super lightweight. It's a few $100 with a nice, you know, relaxation software. So I guess it should not be a big effort to really integrate it hardware-wise. But this, again, is more the business model than the research model. But I would really be happy to have it.
Well, so I think this is a good point, a turn for maybe the last topic and a formal question. And that's really kind of, you know, I'd like to hear everybody's opinion on, you know, what you think is going to be the smart bet on either going consumer, mobile. So let me just make a one case, and it would be sort of Gary's approach using like an Oculus Quest with consumer EEG equipment. Okay, so on the one hand, we have, you know, the package less than $1,000 that can fit in a small box. Okay, on the other, we're going to have a workstation class laptop with standard lab professional Oculus or Vive equipment. And as a counterpoint to your EEG, we could have, say, a biophysiological measuring device that's more lab grade, say from Biopack, a company that we work with a lot. So you've got two kits. What are the pros and cons? And, you know, do any of you have a recommendation to all the attendees? Which horse would you bet on for, you know, for this push to get remote science?
Well, I suppose from looking at research we've done in the past, I could see that for different situations we could use both, but more likely we'd probably want the the laptop-based scenario, where I think you can be more responsive and adapt the scene better to other inputs. I don't know with Gary, is it the Quest? Could you make that adaptive to, say, inputs that you're reading from, I don't know, the EEG or something like that easily, or is it a standalone?
Yeah. I'm using the Quest currently, but I'm not using it as a mobile, with a mobile application. I'm using it with the Quest Link, and then it's behaving like the Oculus Rift actually. So
Okay.
I'm using the Quest together with a laptop, and thanks to Wizard and the WorldViz guys, I'm able now. I have running a program where the whole Muse data stream is collected, where a separate thread, all the HMD 6 degree of freedom values are captured, all the questionnaires and slider stuff is captured from. So you have a really integrated data stream. It's coming out as CSV, easily to read. So that's what I want actually. But I want, the peripheral system be as lightweight and easy to handle as possible. So I know this might be a dream, but without dreams, no progress.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would.
One second, let me just do a time check for the audience. We're right at the hour. We planned 75 minutes. So after this round of answers, we're going to jump to a little Q&A period. So just so everybody know. Sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
I just would agree with Gary's dream there. I think that is the way, after, running in the lab a high-end system, we know all the issues that go along with running high-end systems that that even happen when you're in the lab with trained experimenters, so I think having something, whatever is as easy and automatic as possible, if we're sending it to home users, is the way to go. If we had our dream that it would work that way. So, but I did want to bring up one other point that maybe it's also a comment from somebody that was posted, from Jody Cullum, that was posted in our questions too, that that another way to go, rather than sending equipment to the home, is to look at sharing across users, VR groups who already have HMDs set up. And so there are some movements towards looking at like sharing participants across VR labs. And Jody mentions that they're working on this at Western University in Canada. But there's also one that was just started through some developers in London, that's called the XR-DRN network, or it's a XR distributed research network. So they're saying XR meaning mixed reality, and so that's the idea, that people can post their own experiments to share them among people that have access to HMDs. So maybe we can post, it's just xrdrn.org is the website, but maybe we can post that too as one direction. But it sounds like, other groups across the world might be doing this as well.
Yeah, we'll send out a link of everything that the panelists have been mentioned in terms of tools to everybody attending after this. Yeah, no, there is a large base of, probably reasonably well installed headsets in the world right now. It's definitely going to be I would say a biased cross section or a demographic.
Yeah, there are also a lot of people out of work right now with time on their hands and needing money. So the idea of actually setting up panels of people who have the equipment, and could do experiments, that's sort of attractive. It could be a source of income for them too.
That's the super important point, and this is really a great point. So maybe, Andy, we should also see whether we can bring all these people also in the audience somehow together in this kind of network, because it's not only sharing your application for their panel, you also could coordinate the panels, and I'm just, trying to convince my dean to buy 50 of those. That's not much, not many, but if 10 labs buy 50, we have 500. And remote means it doesn't matter how far they are away. That's a nice thing with it. So that could be also something. Right. Maybe keep in mind.
Yeah, why should every one of you be trying to invent, the population and the resources and, even the IRB protocols, this is all stuff that could be shared and probably standardized. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, to sort of wrap up and jump to some of the audience questions, if anybody in the audience has a question still, please post. We've got about a half dozen that we'll try and jump into. But just as a closing remark I made to the panelists, when we organized this seminar a couple months ago, you know, I was the optimist thinking that we might be at the tail end of this, and you know, this was an academic conversation, which has been fantastic. But this is just more and more germane. And the more I've talked to you, I realize that, you know, if this is achieved, which I think we need to, because this is going to continue. You know, it seems through this academic year. But if we achieve, we're opening up some really interesting, powerful possibilities for conducting science and expanding, you know, our scalability and cross-section, overcoming some problems. So, you know, there are challenges, and we've identified a number of them right now. But I'm excited what the payout could be. So, all right. So, couple of the questions. One, I guess, just, you know, and it probably has confused others too. We have somebody asking, you know, is desktop VR really VR? And, you know, I argue over that philosophically a lot. Let's just, I guess, you know, Sarah or one of you want to take a stab at that, you know, and just give a sort of succinct clarification, I guess. Can we call that VR?
Yeah, I mean, it is like using a gaming platform, right? But I think Mary brought it up, you know, navigation researchers are often using desktop platforms, gaming platforms, because of the limitations of immersive VR, where you're usually in a room size space, right? Where you can't move over large distances. So in, you know, one area of navigation and spatial cognition, this is very common. In other areas, even, you know, in many other areas, if people might, you know, prefer, have reasons for doing a real immersive VR. And of course, there are advantages to that, where you can really get, I mean, I'd say the critical one is body-based feedback of how you can be interacting with the virtual world, and the virtual world updates with your movements. And so, you know, I think desktop VR is VR. It's not necessarily, it's not considered immersive VR in my, like, you know, initial understanding, but I think it can be used in these effectively to answer a number of important psychological questions.
Yeah, so to me, it fits the bill of virtual reality, and you're right. It's not immersive, not sensory immersive, certainly. But, you know, what is the definition of VR? One of the best VR systems in my early days was Microsoft Flight Simulator that I used, and I actually I became a private pilot, and I attribute a lot of the speed at which I was able to do that to that very simple simulator. That it was a database of 3D models, all the airports in the world. It was highly interactive, and it rendered you know, a visual scene. And VR, when you immerse somebody sensorily, it's almost like turning the volume up to 11. You don't have to build up the, you know, half an hour sitting into a scary movie. You can, you know, as one of our classic demos, walking over a plank on a 60-foot chasm, you get that reaction within seconds instead of. So it, you know, I often go down the route of it's a matter of a psychological state, or from the movie Matrix, the construct that carries the different levels. But pragmatically, you know, there's a big difference when you envelop the senses and you basically are instantly putting somebody somewhere else. So, so related maybe, you know, we haven't touched on, you know, cardboard or, you know, phone-based VR. Is there promise there, or is that too fraught to include in you know, science remote?
Yeah, well, actually, again, I mean, you know, like Sarah, I'm primarily interested in studying navigation, and there's a really notable study that's ongoing right now, where people just made a video game that I think people played on their phones. It was called Sea Hero Quest. It was put out all over the world. Something like 4 million people have played it, and it's actually generating a lot of information, interesting information about individual differences in navigation ability. You know, so again, you know, I think it could be a, you know, it's not a perfect measure, but it's a really good proxy, and much better than other measures we have. You know, so even something that you can do on your phone can be, I think, informative to us as you know, as spatial cognition researchers.
I would also add, one of the things we're working on and is growing in I'd say mixed reality is using augmented reality type interfaces, and I would call this immersive in the sense that if you just take your phone or a tablet and you have an AR, a graphical display on your screen that's superimposed on the real world because of the camera, then that is a way of creating an immersive virtual environment, or at least mixed reality environment, that is of interest to us, because we've been interested in kind of extending the work that we do in VR to AR, like how do people judge distances and locations and accurately use AR representations in the, superimposed in the real world. So that is an approach that we're pursuing right now too, because everybody has a phone, right? And so that's if we can get participants the application to download on their phone, which is not hard to do, then we can do more data collection, from anywhere.
Yeah, that would be the ultimate access or accessibility, certainly. We had a question of are any of you utilizing any sort of monitoring currently when you do study? If you just want to, if anybody can speak to that, I guess I assume the question was meant during remote, but
yeah, I mean,
you mean? Yeah, so go ahead.
Now we're thinking about it. We have a study, a fairly complicated study we want to run, where there's like 7 different tasks, and but we need a certain expertise group for this. So we're hoping that we keep sort of putting it back to when our labs will be open again, but we're also in the last year of our grant. So I think we're thinking about maybe we may actually do something where, where a research assistant is on Zoom or something with the researcher or with the subject while they're doing the experiment. So they're just sort of monitoring what's going on. We're certainly talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've thought about it too, and Gary's already talked about that. He's done that.
Yeah, he's done that. Yeah.
Okay, and then maybe last, since we have an expert of panel here of people knowing an awful lot about VR, and sort of the futurist question. What's what do you think or hope might be available 5 years from now for your work? If you could write the future, or if you do actually have some insight into what's coming down the pike.
You know what I want to have already? A super lightweight mobile VR headset with EEG and PsychoPhys integrated. That would be lovely, and no cabling, so having Wizard go the direction so I can have a Quest application on the mobile. So that would be fantastic. I want to get rid of the cables, any of the cables. So now I just gonna re-implement them to get the Quest do what I want. So I don't really want that. And definitely just what Sarah mentioned, the augmented reality, that's something I want to have too. I have to say, when I got the Quest here and I made the setup for the range of movement, you have this kind of momentary augmented reality, the see-through, you see your own room, and then you have the overlay, the 3D overlay. I was actually blown away. And as I'm very interested in using VR as a communication medium, not only as a research tool, so my research also is into where VR goes, I'm imagining it really, the Kingsman situation where you are in your home and the avatar is taking a seat on your couch. And this is, you have this but this again, this is my Christmas wish picture. And I guess we go there because you could see it already. I was trying to get this kind of overlay in my applications, in my own developments. I couldn't get my hand on it, but I don't give up on it. But this is what I see where it should be going.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite things about the Quest is the sudden black and white see-through mode.
Yeah, I love that.
Fantastic. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Nice.
I was going to say the same thing. I think directions of mixed reality, right? So that you have a headset that has potential for both see-through, video see-through, and immersive, completely computer graphics VR, and kind of that interface. I think that opens up a lot of possibilities, and eye tracking. I mean, I think eye tracking is really important.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
But I'm also, outside of my field, but I'm interested in, this sort of VR interaction, this idea of being able to actually interact more naturally with somebody in VR. I think, you know, one thing that's got to come out of this current crisis, and I think it's changing the world, and I think we're all going to be traveling less and having more. We've learned that we can have remote meetings successfully. So I think I've already decided I'm not going to work every day when this is over. I'm going to have at least a couple of days I stay home and say, if you want a meeting, we'll do it on Zoom. So that makes me think that, you know, there's even a more natural type of interaction that can happen through VR. I think that might be also something that'll be important for the future.
Yeah. No going back now. I think I agree.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been wonderful, super informative to me. Loads of fun. I hope it was for everybody else. Thank you so much for joining. And we'll send out, you know, as I promised, some notes and any of the things that the panelists mentioned to everybody who attended. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good seeing you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.